He's got the whole world in his hands. 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 I speak life, light, joy, peace, and health. And I don't have to worry, I don't have to fear, 'cause I know that he's got it, he's got it, he's got it, he's got it, he's got it.
Good morning. He's still got the whole world in his hands. You know, I first heard that song, He's Got the Whole World in His Hands. I first heard that song when I was just a little boy going to Sunday school. And I was just like, oh, that's a really cool song. And it was catchy. And I found myself singing it around the house. And my mom would sometimes sing it with me. And I could picture my mind as a little boy. I could picture these great, big, strong hands holding the earth right in the middle of it, holding right onto it. And I think about that a lot. And I think about, do we really realize what it means that God has the whole world in his hands? Do we really understand that? So let me start with a question. Have you ever had a long distance relationship? Now, for some of us, we got to go back a ways. It's like, okay, maybe like when I was in college, or maybe way back when, I might have had a long distance relationship, or maybe as a little kid, you had a pen pal. You write letters. That was, for those of you that don't know what pen pals are, long time ago in ancient times, school projects would be, you could write someone in a different country a letter, and they would write you back, and sometimes all that kind of fun stuff. Or you ever do that thing where you tied a message to a balloon at your school and let it go off with helium and wonder who would find it and then write you back? My school did that once. We're like, oh, I never did hear from anybody. So who knows where it could have been, Lake Michigan, I don't know, that ended up. But, this idea of a long distance relationship, the longest distance relationship I ever had was when I went away for a week traveling. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so hard because I miss my wife terribly. And man, you start to remember all the things you take for granted. Being able just to walk into the living room and say, hey, how you doing? Or sitting down for dinner and setting a place for each person. But for families that deal with long distance relationships, it's a very real struggle. First comes to mind is military families. Think of a military, often what are they called? Military brides or military wives that they're here, they're waiting, and they get letters, or they may get to, in a modern technology, may get to do a FaceTime video once in a while. But for the most part, day to day, there's no contact. And you miss that person. You miss the idea of being able, especially if you're sitting at a table alone, eating alone, you really miss that person. Another one is sailors. If you go on these work on sailing ships, you go for months at a time. I've been on a couple of cruises, so you may know that about me. I like cruising. It's a way for me to disconnect and kind of get away from it all. I feel like it's just a wonderful thing because there's no phone cell coverage. It's just me and God and my wife and my kids, and it's wonderful. 4,000 or 5,000 other people, but that they kind of fade away. But we get to know our waiter every single time, because you go to dinner every night in a certain place. We always get to know our waiter. And I love finding out where they're from. Like they'll say, well, I'm from Indonesia, or, well, I'm from, the Caribbean, and here's where I live. And we talk to them. But the thing I'm always fascinated by is they'll say, oh, I'm married, I have 6 kids. And I'm like, how do you do that? Because they travel for 8 months, typically. The typical contract that they sign in for is to sail for 8 months. And most of them go the whole 8 months, and then they'll travel home for a little while, sometime a month, maybe 2. And then they do another 8-month contract. That's normal life to them. And I think, how do you do that? That's so hard. I mean, I think about how much I miss my family after a week. I couldn't even imagine that. It'd be tough. You can't have a regular date night. For the kids, it's hard when it's like, well, I try to understand, but you're missing somebody all the time. And I wonder, why do people do this? Because people choose this. Why would somebody choose this as a life? And it comes down to one simple reason: because they don't have a lot of choices, because of where they live or because of their situation. This option came about, and they chose to do the hard thing for their family. It's not the easy choice, but they chose it for their family's sake because they want to provide for and take care of their family. And I bring all this up because sometimes in life we all do things for those that we love that are not the easy thing to do. It's the harder choice. We can relate with that. But I also think that as Christians, sometimes we view our relationship with God like a long distance relationship. It's like, I just want to talk to him. Could he just come here? Could we just look eye to eye? What's going on? Why? When? You just want answers. Just give me some answers and I'll be good for a long time. I just need to know. This is burning inside me. And it's so hard because we pray and we wait. God, please help me. Please help me. And we wait and we wait. And, we've got these wonderful letters from God that we could read. They're all contained in the Bible, where we can read and understand and know him. But sometimes having somebody face to face is what we really crave. And sometimes we just want to really ask him what's going on and why. So I have a question. What's the longest time that you've ever waited for an answer on a prayer where you just felt like, man, I'm just not getting anything on this? And I know sometimes I ask questions like this, and they're meant as a rhetorical question. But in this case, I know some people have waited 5 years. I know some people who have waited 10 years for an answer to and I'm not talking about a vague prayer. Sometimes people can pray vague prayers like, God, give the world peace. Okay, well, that's that's a pretty vague prayer. You're not giving anything specific there, but a specific prayer like, God, I'm praying for my wife, and I'm praying, God, that you heal this. Or, God, I'm praying for my husband, and I pray that he would come to know you more, that someone would come into his life and that would cause him to have a hunger for you like he's never had before. Now, that's specific prayers. That's prayers that, okay, can hold on to that. How long have you waited and prayed for that? And there may be somebody in this room or watching online that's waited 20 years, maybe 30 years. And waiting in silence is hard. Let's just be real. Can we be real for a minute this morning? It's hard. I mean, I know I'm a pastor, and I know I'm going to give you all kinds of reasons why you should be patient, but it doesn't change the fact that it is hard to do. It's so hard that often it causes Christians to doubt and to wonder if God is even there. It causes Christians that has surprised me over the years. Christians I thought were so devout and solid to even walk away from their faith and say, okay, I prayed this prayer, nothing happened, I'm done, or whatever they might say. And this questioning, this doubt, this feeling that we go through, it's nothing new. It's nothing new. It's been happening for thousands of years. In fact, 3,500 years ago, there is an event that happened. And I want to unpack that event with you today because I think that's going to help us to understand this a little bit more. But I'm going to ask you to be careful because this event we're going to talk about is such a well-known story that often if you've come to church for very long, you've probably heard it before. If you've watched some movies, you've probably seen it in movies depicted. And so you may find yourself rushing to the conclusion. Like, oh yeah, I know how that turns out. But I'm going to ask you to resist and hold off on that and try looking at it with fresh eyes this morning with me, because I think together we're going to discover something that you may have never, ever, ever thought about or seen before. So today, I want to join together and look at a familiar story about a character named Moses. And yes, I know, your first thoughts will be Charlton Heston. You're going to see that. You're going to be like, there he is, let my people go. I know you're picturing that because, hey, if you've watched television in the last 30 years, this is something that you've definitely seen. You can't miss it. It's been out there. I think they still show it periodically. It's just one of those things that, yeah, it just comes up. And the entire story is fascinating. Oh my gosh. And just like everybody says, movies are one thing, but when you read it for yourself, it's so much more. So I encourage you to read the story of Moses from the original book it comes from and just take it in and let the imagination see and experience it all. But today our story doesn't start with Moses. We're actually going to go back a little further. We're going to cover, it's going to start off with this kid named Joseph and his Technicolor Dreamcoat. If I say that, you'll probably understand a little bit more of where I'm going with this. So we're going to talk about Joseph because he and his brothers, they didn't exactly get along. And I know, if you've got siblings or cousins or neighbors, you can maybe relate to a point too, but specifically siblings especially, you grew up in a house with people, day in and day out, and, their smelly socks or their towels they leave on the floor in the bathroom, or they leave their cups laying around everywhere. There's always something. Or they took my shoes and didn't ask. They borrowed my shirt and didn't wash it afterwards. There's reasons we get really upset at our siblings because how could they think of that? They're not even respecting me. But Joseph and his brothers had a whole nother level of conflict going on. I mean, if you think you got it bad, have you ever heard your siblings, have you ever overheard them discussing two options, either kill you or sell you? I mean, if it gets that bad, it's getting bad. And this is Joseph. This is how our story goes with Joseph. And I'm just going to give you a coverage because I want to get to a point where he's older in life. But when he was young, his brothers were jealous. And he didn't make it easy on himself because I'm just going to be honest. I think he was a little braggadocious at times. I think he was a little bit like, let me tell you about the dream I had last night. And in this dream, you were bowing down to me. And they're like, what? What is your problem, Joey? And they're ready just to go after him. But listen, Joseph was special. I mean, his dad gave him a special coat. He had prayed and prayed and prayed. And God answered his prayer with Joseph and being born. And so Joseph was special in many ways. But as you can imagine, that caused conflict in their family. And his brothers had a choice. And they chose, really did happen, to sell him to something. Joseph was a victim of human trafficking before that word was used. His brothers, his own brothers, sold him. It's okay. We're going to get rid of this problem. And make it worse, they lied to their dad and told him he was killed. It's got similarities to a movie I watched recently, The Count of Monte Cristo. One of my favorite movies of all time, where this guy just goes through horrible circumstances, unjust circumstances in his journey through that. But that's a fictitious story. Joseph is an actual historical event. So let's talk about this because I don't know about you, but I love true stories. True stories are different than just some movie I watched. True stories is like, okay, wait. Somebody actually went through this. Somebody actually lived this. And so maybe it can encourage me a little bit. So Joseph is this guy. His life gets turned upside down. We can't even comprehend what it would be like to wake up and realize that now I'm sold as a slave. And this is his world. Went from probably having a lot of nice things, in their life. I mean, his dad was a cattle. Well, we don't know if it was cattle specifically or sheep, but they had animals, a lot of animals, right? And so he was a rancher, put it that way. And so they weren't poor necessarily. So he would have had things. He would have probably never missed a meal. It would have been a pretty good life. From that, all of a sudden, sold into slavery, where if you don't look at the person right, they're going to beat you. They're going to beat you sometimes just to remind you that you are a slave and you're supposed to do whatever they say, just to keep you in line. This is his life now. And he ends up in Egypt, which in our world would be like ending up in New York City, right? I mean, Egypt is this huge city with so much going on, huge buildings, and so unlike life in mid-Michigan. So different than life in a rural half country, half city, mid-Michigan. We don't even understand. Here's the city life, and this is him, and so he doesn't even know his way around. He doesn't know anybody. He's by himself. He's sold into this market, and the person that buys him says, okay, I'm going to buy that guy. He looks like he gets some work done. He's working in the house, and we're not going to go through all of the stuff that happened, but he ends up in jail again unjustly. He's innocent. He probably said to the jailer, hey, I know you hear this all the time, but I'm innocent. I shouldn't be here. Like, yeah, sure, come on. Shut the door. They hear it all the time, sure, whatever. But he's in jail, unjustly accused of something he didn't do, but he's there. He had to have been praying because, mind you, he was a believer in God. He didn't find God through this. He had God at the beginning. So what was it like? Can you imagine what he might have prayed at night? Was it revenge? Smite my brothers, let lightning attack them. Was it just, God, please, 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 let my dad come find me. I miss my mom. I'll forgive my brothers. Could you just get me back home? I want to be home. Could you imagine the heartbreak he would go through? Maybe he'd get a little bit of hope because he'd see somebody coming from a distance who looked like it could be. That wasn't. Hope drop. God, please help me. Please help me. Day after day, night after night, and no answer to his prayer at all. No answer. To him, it's like God didn't just forget him, but God decided he didn't need him anymore. He must have felt like God doesn't even care about me. Look what's happening to me. This is unjust. This is horrible. This is his life. This is the new normal. He may be thinking, well, I could die tomorrow, but little did he know he had a lot of stuff coming up. So he's in jail. He's in prison. And just when you think, okay, this is definitely the end of the story. This is a horrible ending. He dies in jail. But through another miraculous thing, God does something and actually has the ability to get out of jail. Not just out of jail, but it gets a job. Not just any job, but he becomes the vice president of the country. Now that's impossible. That's impossible. If somebody said, I got this idea for a movie plot, here's how it's going to go. He's going to go in jail, he's going to become a vice president. People will say, that is so ludicrous, the audience will never believe it. We're not going to make that movie because it's too unbelievable. The audience is going to go, come on. But this happened. There's documented historical proof to show it. It happened. He becomes the vice president, second in command, only to the Pharaoh. Now, pharaohs back then weren't just like an elected president. These people looked at the Pharaoh as when the Pharaoh said something should be done, or the Pharaoh made a law or decree, it was as if a god, small g, because they believed there were many gods, small g, but it was as if a god had said it. So there was no questioning. There was no, hey, can we? I want to bring this before the court. There was no court to bring it from, no Supreme Court to say I want to challenge. I think he's getting too much power. He was like small g God. He could do whatever he wanted and say whatever he wanted. And he did some outlandish things. So here's Joseph now. And as if the story couldn't get any more fantastic and crazy, but the region, the world is going through famine points of this. And Joseph's family, who wasn't that far away, they were in another land, but a nearby land, they're going through famine. And so, yeah, they've got lots of animals and livestock, but they're finding things are getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And it's getting to a point where they're going to have to look for help outside of their area. And so Joseph is in charge of this, and they've created these tremendous warehouses of backup supplies and reserves of food. And his family has to come to Egypt now to beg and ask if they could buy some food. And this climactic moment happens where Joseph is there and revenge is right in front of him. And he starts to take revenge, but then at the last minute he has mercy. And he forgives his brothers. He reveals and says, it's me. I'm little Joey. Here I am. And they're like, what? They couldn't believe it. Joseph? They come together. It's an incredible moment. And I'm fast forwarding because this isn't really what we're going to talk about today. This is just a setup for what we're going to talk about. But this all happens and then his father, his brothers said for his father. His father comes and they're like, okay, we're going to move here. And it's not just Joseph's dad and their family, but whenever they were a wealthy family or a well-known established family like that, they would have had other families living in the same community as them. Like a huge ranch with ranch hands and lots of people. And they would have all been converted to Judaism, to becoming Hebrews just like them. And so all these people now are going, okay, we're all going to go too. And they're going to move to Egypt. And the Pharaoh says, yeah, Joseph, give him some land if you want to. And so Joseph does. He gives him a piece of land that it wasn't exactly valuable to some people because it could be farmed. I mean, Egypt had prospered because of rich soil from the Nile River for farming. But this area wasn't so attractive for that. But he gives him this piece of property. And today, we're going to talk about characters that you may have never heard of that are in this story. We're going to talk about some people that are going through a really tough time where they're praying and praying and praying and praying and trying to understand where is God in all of this. So as we fast forward, Joseph and his family, they're living there. Joseph has kids. His kids have kids. 215 years go by. And Joseph is now a distant person. Like, in other words, people don't really talk about him anymore. I mean, it's been 215 years. Yeah, they know about him. Their families would have all told the stories, no doubt. But he's no longer alive, and it's gone on 215 years later. And a new king has been established, and since then. And so let's pick this up. We're going to look at Exodus chapter 1, and we're going to start off in verse 8. Let's just pick up our story from right here. Then a new king, to whom Joseph meant nothing. So, yeah, like I said, Joseph is a long memory, not even around, came to power in Egypt. So there's a new king now, a new king on the block. And here's what happens next. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites, they've become a little too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous. And if war breaks out, they'll join our enemies. They'll fight against us and leave our country. So there's a couple of things to note here. First of all, they're worried about outnumbering them, which means that these people were multiplying in a big way. They were doing well for themselves. And he was worried they would leave the country because they were the main labor workforce. You see, back in this time, Steve, you would have hated this as much as I would have hated this. No cranes, no bulldozers, nothing. Screw guns, nail guns, If you want to build something big, like a pyramid or something, you have to have thousands of people. And they're going to have hundreds lined up on one rope to pull something, to give it enough power to lift it. And they're going to dig big pits, fill the pits with sand, build on top, and then release the sand from underneath so it would sink down into place where they want. I mean, all of these elaborate technology things would have to be invented using only one thing, and that's 2 hands, 2 feet. That's what you got to work with. Now, you figure out what you can build. You can build block and tackle ropes. You can build things, but you got to figure out how to make this happen with manpower. And so they were relying greatly upon the Israelites for this. I mean, this is the people who were the workforce. They were the workers. So it continues in verse 11. So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor. And they built Pithom and Ramesses as store cities for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. Have you ever felt like you've been worked ruthlessly? Maybe we can relate to it to a point. But these people were worked hard. And this is where I want to park the car, turn the key, and shut the engine off for just a minute. I want to park right here and think about this for just a second. This is what I want to look at. Look around this scene. Look around us for just a minute. What do you see? The people of Israel are now in a land called Goshen. And so I want to look at a map here with Goshen. Goshen's kind of on the north, the north eastern part of the delta for the Nile. You have the Nile River that would come up through here. And there really wasn't much happening here. Like I said before, it was more of a, not best for farming, but great for livestock and animals. And so that's why, Joseph handpicked it for his family. But it's also strategic. So they wanted to build these 2, think of them as storehouses. This is what they were having to build first. Fortresses for weapons, to have like a garrison for military outposts, if you may, so they could defend their land from invading invaders. And so Israelite was very strategic in wanting to build it there, and they used these Israelites to do that. But over time, Goshen became more populated. It started off as just a community of a small community of people, but it grew and grew. Hundreds of years later, 215 years later, it's grown to huge masses, numbers of people. It would have been thought of as the Hebrew ghetto, is really, if you want to think of it that way, full of crowded houses, masons, bricklayers, carpenters, tradesmen. These are the workers that built things for Egypt. And there's brothers, there's aunts, there's uncles, there's cousins. But they're not the ones in power. They're not the ones who can make the decisions. They can't vote somebody out or vote somebody in. They can't say, hey, we don't really like these 12-hour workdays. We want to go to 10. No, there's nobody to talk to. They don't work check to check. They work whip to whip. You think you've had it bad? Take a good look at this thing called perspective, friends. People are working long, hard days with no hope of ever getting ahead. There's no such thing as a vacation or having a holiday. There's no such thing. You talk about a life with no reason to celebrate. And Pharaoh, who, like I said, he's like a god, and what he says goes. He says something that you hear today, and you're like, why? Who would stand for this? But he says something so outrageous, so outlandish. Here's what he says in verse 22. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all of his people. Every Hebrew boy that is born you must throw into the Nile. But let every girl live. Boys, pitch them. And people did it. People did it because he was the Pharaoh. He was the king, and what he said is the rule. Now, could you imagine what it would have been like if you would have been a mother who was 8 months pregnant when that rule came down? You don't know if you're going to have a boy or a girl. How would you sleep at night? I mean, you talk about stress. You talk about worry. You talk about things that'll keep you up at night. I couldn't imagine as a father knowing there's nothing I could do because the people in charge, they're carrying weapons. I mean, they're in the streets every day. I can't just protest. I can't just say, no, I'll die. So we either comply or die. That's our choices. So I'm praying, God, please, please let it be a girl. Please. So you're praying, and the moment comes when most of us are like excited. Oh, the moment's come. They're going to have a baby. But everyone in this room is full of tension. No one is saying a word about is it going to be a boy or a girl because you don't want to say it out loud. You don't want to scare the mother. But it's there. The mother knows. Everyone knows the baby's born. And everyone's holding their breath to find out. What's this going to be? It seems absurd to us because we can't even put ourselves there because it's like, who would do that? Who would make that rule and who would follow it? Come on. But if you're a Hebrew, if you can imagine being in their shoes in their life, this is normal to them. They weren't alive when Joseph and them moved there at first. They don't know what it used to be like. All they know is what it's been like their whole life. Their whole life has been whipped means go to work and then come back home, sleep, get up, go to work. Come back home, sleep, get up, go to work. That's normal to them. Following the rules that Pharaoh throws down, as ridiculous as they might be, is normal to them. They expect nothing for themselves. They're just there to work. They're happy they at least have food. They're happy they at least have a family, and they have their faith. They can still pray. They can have their faith. And this is normal life, but they were praying. They were saying, God, please deliver us from this. God, please help us out of this. Have you forgotten about us? It's been 200 years of this. God, have you forgotten about us? And these people that are praying these prayers, they're characters that I told you probably never heard of them before, but they're characters. They're people with names like Tammy and Marianne and Melissa and Greg, Sonny. Their names like Jim. Their names like Matt. Names like Rachel. They're people that live a normal, everyday life. Yeah, Steve and Tracy too. I won't forget Raven. I won't forget y'all. Sonny. But these are people just like us, is what I'm trying to say. They're just like you and me who are living their life. And they're praying, God, please help us. Please help us with this. But they're hearing nothing in return. And things are only getting worse. It's like, Lord, just when we didn't think it could get any worse, it gets worse. Come on, Lord, where are you? And believe me, I know behind closed doors, they had to have complained. I mean, we would. They're normal people. I mean, come on, think about it. I'm sure they had jokes. I'm sure they had the jokes like, hey, how many Egyptians does it take to build a pyramid? One, because it just takes one to tell us what to do. Yeah, that's true. I'm sure they had jokes that they would tell back and forth about the Egyptians. They were the butt of the jokes, right? And they had to create a little bit of lightness in the atmosphere now and then. But they would tell the stories. They would gather around the fire in the darkness, put the blankets over the windows so no one could see in, and they'd say, okay, come here. Moses. Here's what happened. Moses. Here's what happened a long time ago. Before, like, we could tell the story of Moses. They couldn't tell, but they could say, look, there was a man named Noah. You know what happened? It rained for the first time. And they tell these fantastic stories, and the kids are going, what? No. And then here's what God did. And so they would always tell the stories of what God had done in the past. But you know as well as I did, when the stories are finished, they would say, what about now? What about us? What's God going to do for us? For 215 years, these people were praying, and they didn't lose faith in God. They didn't stop. In other words, it wasn't like after a couple of generations, they were like, okay, forget it. No. Sure, they had doubt. They were normal people. They had doubt. They had complaining. But they never stopped praying and asking God. How do people do that? I wonder how sometimes. Like, is it a special, maybe some people are just built for it more than others. Maybe some people just have a like inner grit that pushes through those moments. Maybe they're special, but I don't really think that's the case. I don't think it's a gift. I think everyday people like you and me can do that. They have done that for centuries. So how? The Bible's full of stories like this. People that face these horrible circumstances. And in the moment when there's no hope, in the moment when nothing seems to be changing, it's only getting worse, and they know they can't get themselves out of this. There's no way out of this. They need a hero. And what happens next? Now, seriously, I want to hear an answer. What happens in the Bible when things are just looking at their worst? What happens after that? Somebody can say it out loud. There's no wrong answer. Go ahead. Yeah, Moses arises. But God does something, doesn't he? God does something. God moves his hand. In those moments when it feels like nothing could possibly help us now, it's all gone, God moves his hand. And after 215 years of prayer, something happens. God moves his hand. And like a long row of dominoes in this elaborate design, God's hand moves the first one, and then the second, and then the third. And this first one is through the birth of a baby that somebody would think was not anything special. Hadn't even gotten a name yet. But the mother decided to spare this baby in secret. And through another amazing, fantastic story, which we don't have time for today. Read about it. It's in that Bible. It's amazing. But this baby gets adopted, which is a miracle. A baby boy, Hebrew boy, gets adopted by an Egyptian family. And what's even more of a miracle is who this Egyptian family is. It's the daughter of the king, adopts him, gives him a name, and says, we're going to call him Moses. We're going to say, this is Moses. This is who this child's going to be. And she raises him as one of her own. And now this little Hebrew boy that should have been dead from the ghetto of Goshen is the prince of Egypt. Again, this is stuff you couldn't make up. But when God moves his hand, something happens. Now, there's no celebrating in the land. Like, Moses was born. No, the people of Israel just like, oh, we got to get through another day. They had no idea what was going on. You catch this, guys. The people in the city, nothing changed to them. They had no idea that God had just turned the first of many dominoes that would change the event of history. They had no idea. They woke up, the sun was like the normal day. The whips were cracking in the background. Time to go to work. Ching, ching, ching. Another day at the mines. Another day lifting the boulders. Another day going to work. And this went on and on and on. But God always moves. We have history to prove it. So be patient. God always moves his hand at just the right time. Now, there's one last point of this message that I don't want you to miss. And there's a clue found in chapter 2, verse 1. A man from the Levi tribe married a woman from the same tribe, and she later had a baby boy. Like I said, there was no name. What was the name of the father? We don't know. What was the name of the mother? We don't know. We just know that there was a baby boy that was born, and that first domino was tipped. See, today's message is for the unnamed people who wait and wait upon the Lord, for their prayers to be answered. And often we have no idea that we are the very catalyst to what God is actually doing, but we just can't see it from where we are. We just haven't lived long enough yet to look back and go, oh, I was a part of that, and I didn't know it at the time. We don't know because we're not able to look back. But it's those people, like those people we have in the room right here today, never stop praying. The people that told their children the stories never lost faith in God and would continue to tell the stories. These unnamed people are the heroes of today's story. The ones who never gave up when they thought there was no reason to live on. Things are getting worse, but you know what? God's going to do something. I know, Dad, you told me last night. God's going to do something. Okay, Mom, you've said it 15 million times. Just hang in there. God is going to do something. And here's the crazy thing is, you think about this, 200 years, that means there were several generations that never saw the answer to the prayer. For 250 years, parents told their kids, and their kids told their kids. Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Noah's Ark, all these incredible stories. Well, God always shows up and does something, but you never know when. So be confident. God always moves his hand at just the right time. Never stop praying because God always moves his hand at the right time. After all, God, who created this whole world, it easily fits within one of his hands. He's still there. He's still got this world in his hands. We bow our heads. Heavenly Father, help us to find hope by looking at what you've done before. Help us to remember that you are in the middle of working something great and fantastic, and it's going to be good, but we just need to hang in there. We just need to be patient. We just need to wait. Lord, I thank you that you do have the whole world in your hands. We trust you. We have faith in your plan. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. So I want to finish off with a little bit of a upbeat version of the same song we saw a minute ago. So watch this with me.
step.